Hello, welcome. I'm so glad you all are here with me today. My name is Carrie Cantrell. I'm a facilitator at Circles, and I'm also a therapist and a life coach. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself and Circles. I'm, as I mentioned, a therapist and a life coach. I have my own life coaching practice at Carrie Cantrell Coaching, where I help people gain emotional wealth and live a more balanced life. I really help people focus on gaining that little bit of confidence and self-worth that you've been aiming for and overcome all of that mind drama. I also want to make sure that you know a little bit about Circles before we get started and maybe talk a little bit of logistics. So Circles, for those of you who don't know, is a leading platform for emotional support. We ensure that no one has to overcome life's challenges alone. We are built on the core principle that in order to overcome any of life's challenges, you need to be heard and you need to feel supported by people who actually understand what you're going through. So our platform matches people who are going through similar life challenges, such as loss of a loved one, divorce, or narcissistic relationships, with other people who are going through those similar experiences. And every circle is led by a mental health professional. And together, the members of those circles have a safe place to chat, meet weekly over video, and really support each other through the healing process. Today, all of you for attending have a special offer, and it's a free month at Circles. So everyone gets a free month, and you can use the code NEW2022 to get take advantage of that offer. I'll post it again at the end, but you'll also get an email afterwards with that offer. I'm so glad you guys are here with me today. And just a few logistical things before I dive into today's topic. This is a one-way video and audio on today's webinar. That means that you can hear me and you can see me, but I can't hear or see you. But we do have this great chat feature. So go ahead and drop some comments into the chat box because I want to hear from you. I want to know what you're thinking and feeling throughout the process of this webinar so that I can respond to your questions. So go ahead and use that. I'm so glad once again that you're here for me. We're going to go ahead and get started. So today's topic is understanding the narcissistic abuse cycle. Today we're going to really talk about narcissistic abuse cycle. And this is what happens and what occurs when someone close to us has narcissistic characteristics or diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. So if you're watching this webinar, that means that you believe someone in your life has characteristics of narcissism. And we believe that about up to 5% of people have a narcissistic personality disorder. Obviously, it's really hard to diagnose. Not everybody goes and seeks help when they have these tendencies, but it could be up to about 5% of people in our population who experience some of these characteristics. While being close to a narcissist is difficult, we know that kind of even separating ourselves or leaving that person or creating distance if it's a family member is even harder. But being in the relationship with someone, and I'm going to use relationship broadly today, whether it's a romantic relationship, a family relationship. So your narcissist is a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister. That relationship, whatever it is to you, it takes its toll. Many of you are here today learning about narcissism and this abuse cycle because you probably feel emotionally exhausted. And don't worry, you're not alone. That's why everyone seeks out this knowledge. That's why everyone seeks out this support, because it gets to a point where it's difficult and it's hard to handle. And we are here for you during this part of your journey. Today, we're going to talk about a few important topics that are going to support you in these relationships and in your own personal growth. And keep that in mind as we go through, because talking about the narcissistic abuse cycle might bring out some thoughts and feelings related to what you're experiencing. But our circles are here for you. Our circles are here to help you process some of those things. And before you leave today, you're going to have some tips and strategies to help you really think about how you might want to move forward with the information you've learned today too. So don't be afraid to use that comment box and that chat box so you can gain the most information as possible and my support, get the most of my support today as possible through this topic. So as I mentioned, a few of the things that we are going to go over today is we're going to expand your knowledge on the different phases of the narcissistic abuse cycle. We're going to understand the impact, what that abuse cycle does. And we're going to develop some strategies for really managing the abuse when it does occur. So I just want to start out by saying there are a few different models that when we talk about abuse cycle, those general terms that you might think of. But what we are going to be talking about today typically has 3 different phases with an optional 4th phase, with phase 1 be idealization, phase 2 being devaluation, phase 3 discarding, and that optional 4th phase, which I'm going to touch on today too, called hoovering or Hoover, which you'll learn more about that when we get there. It doesn't always occur to us. It doesn't always happen, but I wanted to throw it in there and explain it because it's an interesting concept. So we're really going to focus a lot on phase 1 through 3 today. But one of the reasons, as I mentioned, that we do this and we learn about these different phases because it brings us a lot of awareness to what is occurring to us in our relationships, what is happening when we're in these relationships with the narcissist in our life. And half of managing a narcissistic relationship that we're in is being able to know what it means, what's happening, being able to say, okay, these are the facts of what's happening. This is the data of what's happening. Now, what can I do about it? So I'm so glad that you all are here today. So we're just gonna jump on in. Actually, we're not going to jump on it. Let me go back to this. So one of the things that we do want to know about the abuse cycle is what happens when we're in it. So think of the abuse cycle as a pattern of highs and lows. So when you're in it, it's kind of like you're on that roller coaster. I talk about roller coasters in a lot of different terms if you've been in any of my webinars, but this one's a very different kind of roller coaster. So when you're in a phase like idealization, as we talk about it, you're going to see it's really high phase. When we go to devaluation and discarding, it's going to feel really low. So this pattern or this cycle is a series of highs and lows. And what it does is the narcissist is really confusing their partner or their family member. And please, in the comment box, tell me who the narcissist in your life is. Is it your family member? Is it a loved one? Is it your romantic partner? Tell me who it is, because I'd love to know who my audience is today. But there's a series of highs and lows. They're, really making some different moves in your life to help get what they want. And that's what the narcissist is doing. And that's why we see all these different phases, and they end up working in tandem with each other to keep you tangled in their web. So it's kind of like that second you think like, oh, well, this isn't working for me. And in a normal relationship, you'd be able to walk away. But in a narcissistic relationship or a relationship with narcissistic tendencies, it's like, whoop, let me swoop you right back up. And that's why it goes in a cyclical form. This cycle is dangerous, and that's why we want to talk about it. They make the victim or the person or you kind of question your own reality. I'm sure these are things that you've kind of started to recognize. You question your own reality. You're like, well, am I right? Did I know that? Did I do that? But it's all about the cycle. The cycle explains why we feel that way sometimes, and really leads the person in the relationship, not the narcissist, but the other person, to question their world, want to know what their value is or their worth is. And these are all really important because the cycle is what kind of creates the narcissistic relationship, creates the tendencies and the characteristics to move into your relationship with that person. And if you're just joining us, remember, I'm using the word relationship today very broadly. So whether it's a romantic relationship or it is a familial relationship, today we're going to talk a little broadly, and I will be specific when I'm talking about specific types of relationships. So as I said, we're just going to dive in and we're going to talk about each phase and what they are. When I explain them, I expect light bulbs to come on and be like, yes, I have experienced that. I have lived that. And I want by the end to be like, none of this is new to me, but now I know how the pieces go together. So the first phase is idealization. Idealization. Okay, lots of hard words today, guys. Never claimed to be an English teacher. Idealization. You may also recognize this as a familiar word, love bombing. That's what this whole phase feels like. So the narcissist is showing their partner or their family member attention with gifts, compliments, and love scenarios. Something that this reminds me of is like you just meet someone and they're telling you what your life could be like. And they're like, here's our white picket fence. Oh, here's some flowers. Let me just like swoop you up and show you what the world can look like, right? Love bombing. And some common behaviors that maybe it looks like for you, because my example is not what it looks like for everyone, might be increased attention, gift giving, just grand gestures. Like, let me go above and beyond because this is a beautiful new relationship. And maybe even loose boundaries, like moving too fast, like intimately, you're moving too quickly. It could be sexually, it could just be kissing too soon, more than you would in an average new relationship. It could be talking about marriage too soon. But then also the last example of common behavior is a sense of ownership, or they start to create isolation from others. Maybe you're spending a lot of time together and you don't necessarily notice it. It's not in a controlling way, but it's in a, we're in love kind of way. And that sense of ownership or isolation just tends to escalate really quickly. It's the two of you against the world. I see some people kind of telling me in the comment box who their person is in their life. I see a lot of people are here for romantic relationships. I see a few people kind of letting me know that they feel like they might have a couple narcissists in their life, both romantically and in their family. So thank you for letting me know. That's great. Keep those comments coming. So yeah, and I want to kind of break this down a little bit because I think a lot of us struggle with knowing the difference between what love bombing looks like in a romantic relationship and what love bombing looks like with a family member. I think in my circles, my support groups that I run, this is one of the most common questions I get when we talk about this first phase of idealization. What is the difference? What does it look like? A lot of times people will say to me, I don't think that happens, especially in an established relationship. People will think that love bombing doesn't happen to them anymore. So let's break this down just a little bit further. First, let's take a look at romantic relationships. So both of these sides show us romantic relationships. In new relationships, this first phase of idealization might look like saying what you want to hear, showering you with gifts, using terms like soulmate, giving you compliments really often. And you might even feel like the relationship is intense and unbalanced. Like, whoa, I've never felt anything like this before. That might be what you say to yourself. And you might find that your new partner needs a lot of attention. And there's a lot, maybe more PDA. And these are just some examples. And even if you're already in an established relationship, I think it's really important to acknowledge what love bombing in a new relationship looks like. One of the other common things that I often hear is that people feel like they have a pattern of attracting narcissistic relationships into their life. So if you feel like you have a lot of narcissistic people in your life, Make sure you know what the red flags are so that if you do go into a future relationship, you're not seeing these things. For existing relationships, this is where people often get confused. Love bombing is not inclusive to romantic relationships, and it is not inclusive to new relationships. In existing relationships, it might just look a little different. People can be in relationships for 20 and 30 years and still have cycles of idealization or love bombing occur in their relationship. Just remember the definition if you're trying to figure out where it is happening in your relationship. Love bombing is specifically a manipulative tactic that is characterized by using admiration, attention, affection to obtain a desired outcome. Okay? This means that it can happen in any way. I mean, I have seen through working with my clients that love bombing can come through in their loved ones or in their partner's love language. Our love languages could be by acts of service, cleaning the yard, cleaning the house, doing the dishes, like doing any sort of things. So if you notice excessive patterns of doing things around the house, that could be them love bombing you. It may not be your love language, and you may not be like, "What are they doing?" But it could be them love bombing you. Other love languages are physical touch, words of affirmation, so those compliments, quality time, so spending a lot of time with you, asking you to watch a movie with them, and of course, you're always going to forget the last one. Well, I think you get the hint. You're always going to forget one, right? But sometimes an existing relationship it also shows up as them just doing something unexpected, because in existing relationships, we have patterns, we have routines, and people might just show up as doing something unexpected. They might even just accept your opinions in a stable, I wouldn't say secure, but in a stable relationship. And with a narcissistic partner, they might just be like, "Oh, that's a great idea." That might be their form of love bombing. So they just come through very subtly. They might even start talking nicely about your friends or your family. So look out for the subtle unexpected. If any of this is resonating with you, go ahead and tell me in the comment box. Now, I want to talk about love bombing and family for a second, because that's another place that people get tripped up. When your family is kind, or they buy you just a small, meaningful gift, or maybe even bring home your favorite treat from the grocery store, or they cook a nice meal, even if they ask you for help, that might be their way of showing love because they're giving you attention and care. They might do something nice for you or help you in return. Spending quality time together. But once again, it all comes back to when they do something that kind of shocks you or do the unexpected, because it's out of the normal characteristics of the narcissist, right? And I also added onto the list when they create an alliance with you personally. They're trying to get you on their side. Now, creating an alliance is also dangerous in some ways, and we're going to see that in a little bit. But when they're trying to get you on their side, they're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to show you love. So that's where it becomes love bombing for you. But overall, narcissists can create an alliance, especially in families, to create something called triangulation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I see some more comments coming in, just kind of talking about what love bombing looks for them. Maria says, "My boyfriend shows me he shows love bombing Sorry, I can't read today. Maria says, my boyfriend immediately showed me love bombing when we first met by talking about what our life would look like. Jackie says, my husband compliments me excessively during our love bombing stage. Yes, thank you guys so much for sharing some of those examples. Perfect. Let's talk about phase 2, devaluation. So this is when the narcissist begins to show new, like a new version of themselves, but it's a truer version of themselves. They've started to see the fault in your behavior, so they've started to change the way they act towards you. Maybe they even start to feel threatened a little bit. And that's where the devaluing comes out. They might start using language that sounds like put downs, and they're integrated into the conversations as well. And like I said, it's often prompted because they feel threatened. You know, you have gotten to this place where you're feeling a lot of love from them. You're doing really well. You've moved out of the honeymoon phase, though, and now the relationship's feeling more comfortable. And, you know, an average person, if you were in the relationship with an average person, you might start to feel like peace and comfort, and your partner would start to feel peace and comfort and create security. But with a narcissistic person, it's just like a different set of feelings that start to arise. They're like, oh, this, you know, this doesn't feel great. You know, they want to move forward. They want to do A, B, C, and D. So a lot of feelings of threat and insecurity start to arise. And that's where we start moving into a devaluation phase. We start to see different characteristics come out, different behaviors. That's where the triangulation I was mentioning, which is the last one on the list, comes up. And as I mentioned before, triangulation is related to alliances. The goal of triangulation is usually to divide people in an argument. So imagine there's 3 people and 2 people are on a side, and people who have narcissistic tendencies are going to use that to their advantage in arguments. It's definitely a manipulation technique. But some of the other common behaviors in this phase are, you know, using insults and criticism as a way of communication. And it's poor communication overall. You're going to see an increase in boundary violations. They're not going to be listening to your wants and your needs as much anymore. You're going to see more of that control and isolation come out as more intentional than by default. Like in love bombing, it's like, hey, let's hang out together. And in this phase, it's more of like, why are you going to hang out with your friends? You know, it's just the tone has changed. There's a lot more withholding that can happen on a sexual level, physical level, emotional level. And withholding is just like what it sounds. You know, your partner is not going to give you these things. If we're talking about family members, that might look a little different, but it can also be very similar. They might not talk to you as much. They might not give you as many hugs. They might not listen to you if you need support. So keep in mind that for family, it can come similar, but in just different ways. There might be more threats of violence or actual violence that happen in this phase because they're not seeing you as valuable. So if you have a partner or a family member who's more aggressive, then that's when the violence or the threats of violence starts to come out. And then gaslighting. You know, gaslighting is a decently trendy term right now in society. I think that when we're in the lives of people who are experiencing narcissistic tendencies, we are truly experiencing what gaslighting is, but we have to really make sure that we know what we're experiencing when we use that term gaslighting, and know that gaslighting is a very specific type of emotional abuse where people are trying to convince us of something that's untrue. They try to convince us that we're wrong, we're crazy, we're not seeing things clearly. And that's what gaslighting is. You know, people, use examples of all the time where they get into arguments where it's like, well, you should have done that, and you might be on the other end of that, and you're like, well, I did do that. Let me show you. And then it's like, well, you still didn't do it. The argument can go around and round. I always use the example, and it's kind of like a silly example, but it's like, you could have a pen. You could say your partner, who's the narcissist, says that pen is blue, and you're sitting there looking at it, and you're like, the pen is black. And the narcissist goes, the pen is blue. And I know it's a silly example, but it's almost the closest thing I can think of to gaslighting, that your partner says so many times that the pen is blue that you start to wonder if you don't know what the color black is. And you start to really question yourself and your ability to rationalize and think clearly. If that is, if devaluation, this phase of devaluation is really hitting home with you, let us know. Let us know in the comment box. We're going to move on to discarding. So I think devaluation phase 2 is probably one of the hardest phases for a lot of the people that I work with, a lot of people going through my circles. Sometimes what happens is when we talk about devaluation, people are like, no, I'm just always in a discarding phase. And then when they sit and they think about it, they're like, no, I'm actually always in a devaluation phase, because they realize how much they're put down, they're talked back to, their feelings aren't validated. They don't feel like a human in their relationship when they sit back and they think about what actually happens on a day-to-day basis. And then they realize that, maybe it'd be better to feel a little more on the discarding side. At least that's what people tell me, right? But discarding is where, it's like the reaction, right? So you move from love bombing to devaluation. And when you get to devaluation, you try to fix it. You try to solve it. You try to say, hey, I need some more empathy from you. Hey, can we compromise? Hey, can we talk this out? Can we communicate more? That's you in your relationship with the narcissist in your life. You're trying to see where we can meet in the middle, because that's what an average person does. You see a problem, it's not working, you have that icky feeling inside of you, and you really want to make it work. But when we start doing that, and it's not a result of our behaviors, but it's a result of the reaction between the two, the result of us wanting to work it out and the narcissist wanting to devalue, discarding happens, right? So it's like the two coming together, because we want a healthy relationship, but now our narcissist says, you've just lost all your kind of luster, right? You've lost all your shine, you've lost all your appeal. And so our narcissist is going to portray some of these common behaviors that you see here. They're going to stop putting in efforts. They might even, depending on the type of characteristics that your narcissist takes on, they may even start playing the victim. They may start blaming you for more things, or it kind of depends on their characteristics. But yeah, they might start playing the victim. They're going to start invalidating a little bit more. Meaning that they're going to invalidate like your emotional feelings. They're not going to listen to any of your requests, and they're going to put the blame back on you. They may even betray the relationship in some ways. And I don't necessarily mean like cheat, but they may not be in the relationship. They may not consider the relationship as something they've committed to, whether that's like emotional, whether that's being out with friends. And this is definitely like a romantic characteristic. And then in this stage, you're going to see increased feelings of anger and contentment, right? So there's definitely going to be a different level of feelings here, We see more physical, emotional, and verbal abuse here because both sides are angry, right? You're frustrated. You don't know what to do. They're frustrated. They don't know what to do. So things typically escalate. And in this phase is where we see a lot of people make decisions about the relationship. It could be a permanent decision to end the relationship. It could be a temporary decision to pause the relationship. But during this phase is typically where people say, you know what, I can't do this. And they kind of go like this, because even the person who's with the narcissist says, this is more than I can bear, and you're not willing to meet me in the middle. And I'm going to talk next about where we make the decision point. And the decision point is here in the discarding phase. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what I do want to say before we go on to that conversation is that every request that we make to the narcissist in our life is valid. It is valid to ask for compromise. It's valid to ask for some empathy. Everything that you are asking for is valid. So remember that. And I just always like to make sure that we cover that part. So as I mentioned, this is where you kind of, in discarding phases, where you kind of get to decision points. And maybe it's not every time you go through a cycle with your partner, especially if you guys have been together for a long time. But think of it this way. It's kind of like where you've reached your breaking point and you have to make decisions. And when people have been in their relationships for a really long time, it might just feel like, oh, we've gotten to a pattern and this is where I just maintain status quo. But oftentimes when the relationships are newer and you're still trying to figure out what that pattern is, especially if it's in newer relationships, this is definitely where a lot more confusion comes in, a lot more confusion to decide, like, what am I going to do? Can I handle this? And, you know, your brain is probably saying, you know what, I've had enough. I can't live with this, figure out how to cope. And so at the end of the day, in a narcissistic relationship, it's important to remember that there are primarily two options. I like to sometimes say there's three, but primarily two options. You either stay in the relationship and figure out how to manage it, grow your skills, build your strengths, you know, do all the things, or option two, you leave the relationship. And you really have only those two options. The third kind of option is you do nothing, you stay in the relationship and you just suffer. But I don't like to consider that a full option. So you have two main options and you can go down one of these two paths. And I assume many of you are here because, you know, you want to either work on the relationship, you're here to learn more, things of that nature. And that's an okay choice. It's an okay choice as long as you're choosing it. Obviously, if you're suffering a lot of abuse, then I want you to choose what's best for you. But we're here to support you through all of those decisions that you make. We have a lot of people in our circles who are choosing to be in the relationship and here to learn and grow as much as they can. And their choices are their choices. So at this point, you do have to choose what you're going to do in the relationship and what you're going to do with the relationship. And that's where phase 4 comes in, Hoover. And yes, Hoover, like the vacuum, is where the name of this phase comes in. And that's why I think it's important for us just to acknowledge this phase is here, because while you're sitting here trying to make this decision about your life, you're trying to decide, you know, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay? Am I going to go? Your narcissist has the ability to sweep you back up like a Hoover vacuum and sweep you back up into the cycle. Because remember, phase 1 is idealization, very much love bombing. So if they sweep you back up while you're sitting there thinking about it and they start showering you with gifts and compliments and, you know, telling you that it's going to be okay, or I'm going to change, it's okay, I'm going to do some work on me, there's lots of things that a narcissist can do and say to you in that moment to make you think that this is going to work out. And that's how the cycle repeats itself, because it feels good for a while and then you get right back into the phase. And that's why I think this phase for Hoover is really important to acknowledge that it's there, because in the discarding phase, you have full control of deciding what option or what path you're going to go down, but knowing that there's a little piece of you, because you're stuck in an abusive cycle, that the narcissist can easily sweep you back up, especially if you're not fully aware that you're in the cycle, which I think, there's a level of awareness here because you're all here, and props to you for being here and learning. Thank you. So yeah, the Hoover cycle. So take a moment to reflect. I'd love it if all of you would just kind of share a takeaway in the comment box. Tell me like what your biggest takeaway is from just thinking about those 4 phases. Is there a phase that you're in right now? Is there something that you learned about one of the phases that was new for you? Tell me what you're kind of reflecting on personally at this point after learning about those 4 phases. Julie says that the Hoover phase is a new concept for her, and learning about it is going to help her be more thoughtful in the future. I love that. I do really think that Hoover phase is kind of like one of those light bulb moments to help us be more in control of our destiny, and really help us take back like our power in the cycle. Because if we don't know that it is happening, then how are we supposed to be able to kind of take back that power? Yeah, Brian agrees. Brian says, I'm being hoovered. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, okay. Mary says that she's currently in a devaluation cycle and that it really sucks. Yes, devaluation. So for sure, if anybody has any tips on what helps you get through a devaluation cycle, please share them in the comment box and I will share them with the group. I know in one of my circles this week, we were talking about what helps get through some of those difficult moments. And the gray rock method came up a lot for both devaluation and discarding. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's just kind of like ignoring, like trying not to show too much emotion through the difficult moments, not trying to give in. Sometimes when we like fight back or respond back, it doesn't necessarily help us. I think one of the tips when we're really feeling it in any of these difficult phases that I always give my groups is look for the patterns, because each of our partners or family members is a little different and they respond differently. They react differently to different things. I mean, overall, they have a lot of the same characteristics and tendencies, but there's even different subtypes of narcissism. And if we pay attention to the patterns, if something doesn't work this time, what can we try different next time? And the more that we create a pattern that works for us, that creates calm, that creates quality of life, that creates a little bit of peace, it may not be perfect, it may not be the perfect response or the perfect way to handle it, but the more we create a pattern that works for us, the better it's going to be. Perfect. So there's some things that I want us to think about, and it's the impact of the cycle. I mean, I can tell you guys all of these things like all day long, and you're like, I think sometimes when I share this information, people are just like sitting there and they're like, well, thanks for telling me how crappy that is, right? But the reality is we need to deal with what the impact is, like, and then we need to deal with some strategies on how to manage it. And if any of you and I'm not going to cover like what it means to leave your relationship, but if that's something you want to do, like we can talk about that. That's not something we're going to cover today, or talk about recovering from a narcissistic relationship, but we can talk about that after the webinar. We're here for you. So I do want to talk about the impact of the cycle though. And for the narcissist, I mean, think about it. The cycle is made to help them keep their loved one. Their emotional needs of living in the chaos get met. They get to keep their loved one, whether it's a romantic partner or a family member. They get to get what they want through control and manipulation. So they have a lot of things that are in it for them by living in the cycle. You know, they get to express love when they want it. They get to keep control when they don't. I'm sure it still doesn't feel good for a narcissist. I can't speak for a narcissist, but I'm sure it still doesn't feel good. Like if you were living in their shoes, going up and down in the emotions all the time probably doesn't feel good. And we know that people have narcissistic tendencies for specific reasons. You know, they've been through trauma. They were raised that way. So, you know, potentially as one of the options. A lot of people who are narcissists were raised by narcissists. So they've been through it too. Like it doesn't feel good. So, you know, as people with empathy, we can have a little bit of empathy for someone with narcissistic tendencies, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to help you guys. So I want to spend a little more time on that. For you, this cycle, it feels demoralizing. It's hard to get your needs met when you're constantly going up and down. We're taking on a lot of their feelings. Like we're internalizing their feelings. We're like trying to understand our feelings, and they're putting their feelings on us because it's hard for them to process their feelings. And we tend to take on a lot of the blame in this process too. Which is one of the things that we can do to help ourselves as well, is we can learn to not take on these feelings and not to process this blame. So these are also some of the areas where we can continue to grow. But it's also an area for awareness, because if we're going through this cycle, a lot of the behaviors that are exhibited are abuse. And so that means that we're putting ourselves at risk for mental health concerns and even health concerns. So being aware and paying attention to when we've had too much, when we need additional help and support, and when our body needs health help, like going to a doctor, getting a checkup, making sure that, like, if we're feeling too much tension in our body, that we're really practicing self-care to get that relieved. Because we're going through a lot. When I was talking at the beginning and I said we're probably here because we're feeling emotionally exhausted, I mean that in a lot of different ways. You know, when I talk about mental health concerns, you, as a result of going through this cycle, it can lead to things like depression, anxiety, PTSD. We know can come from a result of being in a narcissistic relationship, but also even just some feelings like guilt, anger, shame. If this is resonating with you, let me know, because these are all the things that we have to clean up from being in a narcissistic relationship. I mean, even your sleep cycle, just those small things, you have to really recognize how this relationship is impacting you. So tell me, what is the impact for you? What are you experiencing so far as a result of being in these relationships? Yeah, Joe says that he definitely struggles with sleeping. Yeah, I think sleeping is one of the most common things that we experience, because like maybe we're just thinking about too much at night. I know for me though, my sleeping turns into like physical, like body aches. Like if I'm not sleeping right, then or not being as productive at work. So it turns into definitely other issues pretty quickly when I'm struggling with sleeping. So I do want to explore just a few skills and strategies to manage the narcissistic abuse cycle. Now, I do think things like talking to a therapist and joining a support group like Circles are great ways to get some specific ideas on how to manage the narcissistic abuse cycle. Because you can really express like, this happened to me, you know, today or this week, and I don't know what to do about it. I even have people come who, you know, come to all these not these webinars, but do a lot of like learning and educating themselves on things related to narcissism and are doing great most of the time. And then all of a sudden they just get stuck in a place that they're like, I don't know what to do. And I think that's one of the impacts or the effects of the abuse cycle is that you are going in a cycle and you can be really good for a while. And then all of a sudden you're just like, this week's was horrible, you know? And so keeping in mind that there's no magical skill or strategy, because when you're living with someone with narcissistic characteristics, it's always like you're trying to figure out what's going to work better tomorrow. And so keeping in mind, these are a little general, but I think it's also really important to the bigger picture. So be honest with yourself. If you decide to maintain the relationship with your narcissist, you need to really be honest that there's going to be some things that you just have to expect from the relationship, or never expect from the relationship is the flip side. So the narcissist is going to not give back what you expect, and they're going to take everything that you give. So you can't always, you cannot expect to always, you cannot expect to have that reciprocal relationship that you are always hoping for. It's not going to happen. So you have to be honest with yourself that you have a different kind of relationship and embrace that relationship for what it is. And maybe some other things that you might need to be honest with yourself about is that it's always going to feel emotionally exhausting, for instance. That there's always going to be certain patterns of behaviors. And these are just some examples, like intermittent affection. They might lie. There's always going to be a difference in perception of events. Those are some examples, but in your relationship, you can probably point the ones as lacking what it looks like for you. And the last one on here I didn't cover, and sorry, I jumped around a little bit, but you have to also be really honest with yourself that you're going to always be seeking to understand your relationship. There is no way to say, you know what, one day I'm going to figure this out and it's going to be great. It's not going to work that way. And you're always going to need to have that space to gain outside perspective that's really healthy. And not always outside perspective about your relationship, but you're also going to need that space to ground yourself, to kind of gather your perspective on reality. You know, maybe it's time with friends, but maybe you also need like a therapist or a support group to help ground your reality about the relationship too. If you decide to leave the relationship, remember there are those two paths. You might want to recognize that it's going to take a long time to heal, to find that next healthy relationship. So you have to be really kind to yourself about that process. You need to make sure that you talk about your experience in a safe and supportive environment too. I think one of the most important things we can do when we're managing the whole cycle, the narcissistic abuse cycle, is set boundaries. And I picked out 5 here that I think are really important and really specific, or at least 5 kind of guidelines that you can use for yourself that are really specific to narcissistic relationships. Identify what's important to you by setting a personal agenda to guide your boundaries. You know, sit down and think about, like, what is important to me? What are my core beliefs? And write down what that agenda is for you. Number 2, avoid explaining yourself. So even if you are setting a boundary or you're saying what you need, you know, be clear, concise, assertive. One sentence. You don't have to say because or the consequence is. You can just say what you need. Number 3, remember that boundary setting is a continual task. There's nothing that says that if you set a boundary today that you're not going to have to read yourself. You're probably in a narcissistic relationship going to have to set the boundary, read the boundary numerous times. I do a lot of boundary work with a lot of clients, and Normally, I'd never say this to them. I would say, okay, you've set it once, you've set the boundary twice. How are we going to do something different? But the reality is with someone, while you're in a narcissistic relationship, it's just not possible. You need to be prepared to set the boundary over again and over again and hold your own. Number 4, keep perspective and stay grounded. Trust yourself. I mean, that's pretty much what that means. Trust yourself and have people in your corner to help you know that you can trust yourself. Number 5, know your limits. Know what you will and you will not accept, and that might include an exit plan. There's nothing wrong with having an exit plan. Just because you say, you know what, if this happens, I'm going to do this, does not mean you are committing to it. Because I think half the time that's what scares people away from having an exit plan, knowing what they'll do, saying what their limits are, is it makes them feel like they're committing to it. The reality is we have every power. We have the power to make every choice, every decision, every moment of the day. So if that means you get to a certain point, you're like, you know what, I really don't want to do it. You sit on it, you make the choice. You have the power in every choice. There is nothing wrong with being prepared. And just a few tips. Know that a narcissist will push your limits. That's why knowing your limits is really important. And know that a narcissist will not change. We always say in relationships, you should never want to change the person, but just know that a narcissist will not change. And just some strategies when you're in each specific phase, some things that might help that are related to each of the phases. In phase 1, really lean on people outside the relationship. You know, don't let yourself get in that isolation bubble too quickly, but lean on people. Let them help you see the reality. Say no to gifts you don't want politely. So if it feels overwhelming, it feels intense, you want things to slow down, don't be afraid to voice that. And that comes to the last one, communicate your needs about the timing of the relationship. Phase 2, devaluation. This impact, how bad the phase of devaluation is lightened by whatever healthy boundaries you set in phase 1. So the better you are at balancing phase 1, it could impact, depending on your relationship, it could impact what phase 2 feels like. When you're in phase 2, though, what you can do is you can focus on facts. You can help your brain say, okay, what are the facts of this situation? Whenever you start to question yourself, and then that helps you learn to trust yourself. Avoid taking on the blame and don't let yourself have that negative self-talk. Practice self-care. Do lots of things for yourself during this phase and practice or focus on learning and growing yourself. And work with a professional to help you reframe the situations so that you're not letting yourself fall into the blame process. And phase 3, discarding. Keep challenging those negative thoughts. Keep challenging the self-criticism and blame that your brain wants to fall into. But also you can start practicing assigning responsibility. What is your responsibility? And what is the other person's responsibility? And really in this phase, decide what you want for your future. And even if that means being in the relationship or still continuing a relationship with that family member, make sure that you decide what you want from those relationships. And I did not include hoovering on here. I always want to say hovering. Hoovering on here. And one of the reasons is because that hoovering stage is really a stage that belongs to the narcissist. That is something that the narcissist is doing. They are invading your phase 3 and they are picking you up and swooping you back into phase 1. And I don't think that's for you. I don't think that's for you to do. So let's help each other. Share one thing that you have done to help yourself while in a narcissistic relationship. Maybe something that's helped you heal. if you're not in one now? Or something that can help you, what is something you can practice? So I'd love to see some of those thoughts in the comment box. I'll keep an eye on it, but I know we're running short on time here, so I am going to keep moving. I really love this quote. I'm at a point in my life where I just want my family happy, my health good, my mind right, and no drama. This quote for me really helps us focus on the good. It really thinks about like where we want to go, where we want to be. And you know, when I was preparing our conversation today and our webinar today, and I was looking for a quote that really resonated with me about the narcissistic abuse cycle and like what we go through in narcissistic relationships, being around narcissistic people. This quote really stuck out to me. You know, I myself have experienced narcissistic abuse, and the one thing that really got me through that experience in my life, got me through to the point where I could leave the relationship, was that at my core, who I was always a person that was driven, always had ambition, always had kind of this, like I always knew what I wanted. I always knew, and I had that drive within me even throughout the relationship that I could get back there. I could get back to the person I was. And so this quote really stood out to me as, you know, something that if I had had it back then, I could hold on to it. And so I encourage all of you to find these things, these small things in your life that help you stay grounded, that help you really know where your power lies. Because no matter what you choose, while it's hard to make the decision while you're in it, while it's hard to recognize what you truly want when you're in these relationships, I encourage you to find the things that drive you to find what you truly want in life. And if it's that relationship, that's okay. If it's, you know, something else for yourself, that's okay too. All of them are hard choices. All of them are hard. But there is kind of this beauty and just knowing what you want and going for it. So, with that being said, we are out of time for today. So if you have any questions, definitely make sure they are in the comment box so that I can respond to them. I know we've had one comment come up throughout our time together that is about circles and joining a circle. So I do want to address that one. It says it's hard to find the time to participate in a group without my partner knowing. How do others manage this? And will anyone find out that I am in a circle? You know, I think this is pretty common for people who are in narcissistic relationships, especially, or even people who live with their narcissistic family members, that they want to keep their time in a circle really private. I mean, I think the more obvious response is that people will join my circles at times when people aren't home. So whether it's during the day when their spouses are at work or their family members are at work. But on Circle's end, nobody will know that you're in it unless you share that information with them. But we practice a lot of things to make sure they're private, including not sharing your information with other group members, and nobody will know your last name. But I will say that a lot of people go very far to make sure that they have the time to join especially our narcissistic relationship groups, whether it means having to do the group from the bathroom or, just making sure that they make the time and the space to have that space for themselves. And I hope that all of you take up that opportunity. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today, but I do want to make sure you guys have that offer one more time. So you will get an email with the information on the free month of Circles. The code is new 2022. I do hope that you're all leaving here today just feeling a little bit more empowered in your journey with the information you've learned and the strategies that you have at your fingertips. And thank you all for taking this time. So you've taken the first step. Make sure you take the second step and look out for the offer in your email. You'll have the details shortly on how to join. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.